So I want to welcome everyone to the Watershed Wetlands Restoration. I'm Nan Parks. I'm a volunteer with 350 Bay Area and working with the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. And I want to thank you all for attending today. I want to thank our panelists for their willingness to do presentations. And I'd like to introduce Jack Lucero Fleck, who is our workshop host. Jack, do you have anything you want to share?
No, just to let people know we are recording it. And as I might have mentioned a long time ago, earlier this morning, all of the workshops are recorded. So there's some great other topics. And I do urge you to go back and watch the other workshops because they should be very informative. We'll put them up on our website.
Great. I also want to introduce, Clevian Hessia, our note taker, and Karina Tempelis, one of the coordinators of the summit. I just want to tell you how thrilled I am to be the moderator. I'm an amateur birder, and I really do understand in the avian world the importance of wetlands restoration for the migration of birds, for birds when they're breeding, and for the birds who live in our wetlands all year long and want to have a healthy and thriving home to live in. So I'm very excited about this. We have a really extremely interesting group of panelists today. The order of the panelists are Linda Hunt from Wild Oyster Project, Liz Taylor from, is it DOER or DOER?
Either way is fine.
Yeah, either way is fine. Marine. Caitlin Sweeney from SS Estuary Partnership, and Kevin Conger from CMG Landscape Architecture.
Hi, let's start with Kevin first.
Oh, okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right, we can do that.
Okay.
Shall I take off?
Well, I like to introduce you a little bit. Is that okay?
Wonderful.
Okay. Kevin Conger is the founding partner of CMG Landscape Architecture. His focus is creating democratic public space and improving the social and ecological well-being of our cities. He believes greater community awareness and engagement results in better stewardship and more sustainable communities. Kevin has led many of CMG's largest and complex open space projects in the Bay Area. Valued partners include the Golden Gate National Park Conservancy for ongoing stewardship of Crissy Field and other agencies and institutions dedicated to thriving cities. Thank you so much, Kevin, for coming with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here, especially with these other amazing panelists and speakers at this summit. I will share my screen. Yeah, I want to reiterate our mission of CMG. We're a firm that's about 20 years old in San Francisco. Our work is primarily all around the Bay Area, and our mission is to increase social and ecological well-being through artful design, which is, I think, very relevant today's summit. I'm going to start by talking about ecological well-being. You recognize this famous image, the blue marble, taken in 1972, is an iconic and an important image to increase environmental awareness. It coincided with environmental awakening in the world, and I have always thought that it's perhaps taken from the wrong side of the globe, because so much of the earth in fact looks like this when we're on the surface. And you may think, well, why is a landscape architect going to start talking about the oceans? He should stick to the dirt. But in fact, 90% of the planet's habitable space is in the ocean. More than half of all life is underneath the ocean's surface. And as we know, the oceans and its health are in significant peril, and to date is very limited in terms of the protections. And the reason that a landscape architect is talking about this is because most of the pollution and contamination in the ocean is runoff from the land, which is directly related to our stewardship of the land and its relationship to the waters. In fact, 80% of the pollution is from runoff such as oils, fertilizers, chemicals, and so forth. And in the Bay Area specifically, the watershed that flows into the bay is massive. as you probably know. It's over 4,600 square miles, goes into 2 states. It's a tremendous amount of runoff that's finding its way into the bay. And there is very important work that needs to be done in terms of intercepting that freshwater runoff before it finds its way into the tributaries and into the bay through constructed wetlands such as this, the stormwater wetlands that's out in the Fremont area. And this work is very, very important to the topic of wetlands and the health of the bay, that we filter some of this dirty water before it actually finds its way into the bay. And in fact, we know once that it gets to the bay itself has just changed dramatically over the centuries. And we see on the left image you guys, I'm sure, all familiar with from SFEI, the historic baylands, and then on the right, the modern baylands. We've lost most of the wetlands around the bay, and those wetlands are very important in terms of their function of filtration of contaminants, as well as providing habitat for birds and many other important species. So while most of the bay used to look like this, we know now that the majority of the bay actually looks like this. And that is where our work as landscape architects is, and stewards, all of us, is very important around the Bay Area. My exposure to these topics and around the Bay Area started 25 years ago when I was a landscape architect and project manager for Hargraves Associates and in charge of the Crissy Field project. And that small wetlands restoration or wetlands construction project at Crissy Field for me was pivotal moment in my career, and in fact was the reason why I started CMG, to focus on these types of projects around the Bay Area in my own community, and have done so with interesting redevelopment projects like that out on Treasure Island, which you may be somewhat familiar with. But what you may not know is on the northern end of Treasure Island, within the 350 acres of new public parks that will be there, is an open space called the Wilds, which is an ecological park, which will welcome sea level rise into it to establish new wetlands as the water levels rise in the bay, to be a habitat, primarily habitat type of a park. It's going to be a new type of a public park for San Francisco, but it's a long ways out. It's perhaps another 15 years before that is built. We've also done a lot of work around social equity and community empowerment around sea level rise, including a project called Rise Up, which we worked with Supervisor Sears in Southern Marin, Southern Mill Valley, and Marin City to lead to awareness around the issues and vulnerabilities of sea level rise through a community-based and community engagement process where people were informed and through discussions amongst themselves came up with priorities and opinions and agreements about what's important in their community preserve and how they want to adapt their communities to increase social and ecological resilience. And we're now currently doing a similar type of a project for the Port of San Francisco on the entire 7.5 miles of the San Francisco waterfront that is under the port's jurisdiction, to look at adaptation for 100 years for seismic safety, sea level rise, to increase the social and ecological sustainability of the waterfront, creating a safe, equitable, sustainable, and inspiring waterfront. But the thing that I really want to talk about today is a small project on Alameda Point called Depave Park, which is a very current vision plan that we have just helped the city and Rec and Parks Department create for Alameda Point. And the Depave is an idea that I have been working with for a long time, and in fact prototyped this in a small project called the Crack Garden, which is my backyard 22 years ago, where we had a small paved area that we simply took out some of the paving and left primarily all the rest of the paving that was there to transform what was a paved space into more of a garden space. And that is the idea, the basic premise for Depave Park. It's about a 16-acre site. It's predominantly paved, as the military had constructed it for their purposes, and as part of the overall Alameda Point redevelopment will become part of a park system. And the idea was to do something that was nature-based and climate positive. Essentially, it's just what it sounds like, a depaving of that big tarmac that is currently out there to create a new habitat-oriented environment that welcomes sea level rise, does not try and hold sea level rise back, but welcomes sea level rise into the park to establish future wetlands into this post-industrial site. A few images of what the site looks like now. The site area is basically that big paved tarmac. You see in the background some of the Veteran Administration's, that's federal property, and some of the wetlands that they've created out there. There are a few buildings that are existing on the site. The one furthest to the left will be removed. That's called Building 29. So this gives you a sense of the existing conditions. And a plan of this essentially removes all the concrete except for a few remnant pieces that are left to remain to provide public access, a boardwalk or a pathway that goes all the way out, and a few gathering spaces. And it's very important for the reduced carbon footprint to recycle and reuse all of that existing paving that's out there. And so one of the premises here is to not make any new paving, but to, if we need paving in a certain areas, to reuse the existing paving that's there, because pavement has a very, very high carbon footprint. And so the notion is to keep the little bit of paving that we need, repurposing what's there, and to crush and recycle all of the existing paving for elevated new areas within the park. We are peeling back the riprap edge that keeps the bay away from the land and reusing that for in-water habitat jetties. So again, repurposing that existing rock, and then opening up the park to allow the tide to come in and connect to the Veterans Administration wetlands, to basically create a thriving ecological park that accepts and in fact welcomes future sea level rise, to where the park in the future becomes wetter and wetter rather than trying to hold water out. This is a view from one of the overlooks looking down across the park, and this is a view of the promenade bikeway that moves through it. And the next view is showing the future sea level rise, where the public access would be preserved by creating a new elevated boardwalk that now moves primarily amongst wetlands and new habitat areas. One of the key, I think, and more compelling aspects of the project is that it's climate positive, which means that it will sequester far more carbon than it emits. And we have developed a carbon calculator, which I'm going to give you the website for on the next slide, that it's free and allows you to calculate the carbon footprint of the embodied energy that's in all the constructed material, including transportation, shipping, and all of that, in order to build a landscape, but also calculates the carbon sequestration rates based on the type of landscape that you're putting in. And the depaved park will offset its own carbon footprint within 4 years to become climate positive and become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And amazingly, the existing landscape that is there now, if left alone, we estimate would take another 220 years before it would become climate positive because of the massive amount of paving that's there. But by removing that paving and adding more sequestration area, we can remediate within 23 years and offset the carbon footprint from that previous landscape as well. So again, we really think these are critical, that landscapes become part of the carbon solution. That website where you can learn about this and get that free app for your use is called climatepositivedesign.com. And I put that in the chat in the previous link. In addition, there's a important social equity component to Depay Park, which is to work with local communities, particularly low-income communities, to bring young people into the process of propagating the plants, collecting the native plants, and working with nurseries such as Literacy for Environmental Justice to get youth involved in the stewardship of this project. And we have done this with Ledge on several other projects in the past. So we're very excited about the possibility of Depay Park, a place where people can experience the natural world in transition. And the city is currently preparing a Measure AA grant application that they will submit today, actually. And if successful, we'll begin a master plan process with the community to hopefully realize this interesting vision. Thank you very much. I hope I was.
Well, thank you,
my
Kevin.
time.
This was very enlightening. I was not familiar with either of the areas, even on Treasure Island. So thank you so much for your presentation, and I hope you can stay for questions at the end. Okay, we're going to move on to Linda Hunter. She is the founder and director of the Wild Oyster Project. Linda is a staunch believer in rewilding our world, restoring ecosystems to support plant and animal life so that they can become more resilient to climate change. She believes that this is our path forward, and engaging local communities to become part of that process is imperative to its success. Linda, welcome.
I wanted to introduce everyone to Casey Harper. She's our deputy director at Wild Oyster Project, and she is helping me with the technology part of this. She's actually running the slideshow for us. So Wild Oyster Project, we're a relatively young nonprofit, started in 2016, and we're dedicated to the restoration of native oysters in San Francisco Bay. These are just some pictures of people learning about oyster restoration. These are our programs. Aside from restoring oysters, we have a shell recycling program. More about include the notion of oyster restoration when they're talking about urban planning and policy. We also are very supportive of oyster farming because one could argue that oysters are the most sustainable fishery around, since you don't have to feed them or water them. You just hang out and they grow with a very small carbon footprint. So oysters have been around for a long time. The oysters that we're talking about restoring are very tiny. They're the Olympia oyster, the ones that you eat when you go out for dollar oyster night, or when you used to back, pre-plague. They are actually much larger, and they grow to maturity much more quickly. A native oyster is about the size of a 50-cent piece and takes 5 years to mature. The oysters that you eat, generally speaking, are Pacific oysters, which are much larger, and they become mature at about 18 months. So if you're an oyster farmer, you're thinking, well, I want to bring these to market sooner, and people tend to like bigger oysters. So these are some other oyster aficionados, including Jack London and Mark Twain. This is how oysters used to be farmed, with those long tongs. Sometimes people ask people from just taking your oysters. A natural oyster bed, all of the oysters are attached to each other. So that's what the tongs are about. The oyster fishermen are actually breaking the oysters off.
I think, Linda, if you could adjust your computer a bit, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I'll just try and finish up the presentation.
Sure, Casey, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
I can. You have about 2 minutes.
Okay, so that was a little bit about the history of oysters in San Francisco. And the important part is that these native oysters that were once very abundant are still in San Francisco Bay, and they just need our help to establish a thriving population again. And once we do that, it potentially has great benefit for us humans and other species that live in the bay as well. And we're not trying to go back to like a previous ecosystem. Now that we have this hybrid landscape of humans and industry around the bay, how do we protect all of that and support the non-human species of San Francisco as well? Like Kevin was saying, sea level is happening. So oysters are a key species of various submerged habitats around the bay. Shellfish beds help adjacent habitats such as wetlands. And while we're doing that, while we're restoring oysters, how are we helping the humans that live with the oysters as well, is something that we think is very important, which is why our approach is a community-based approach, where we're investing in humans at the same time we're investing in oysters. And we think the best way to restore oysters is by having the community do the oyster restoration work rather than doing the restoration work on behalf of the community. So really getting people involved in wanting oysters to be a part of their habitat and feeling like they can make a change. And this is a little video that just shows Olympia oysters filtering water in a tank. And it just is kind of a demonstration of why we think oysters have this ability, is that they filter water. And by doing so, they make the water clear. So it encourages aquatic vegetation growth like eelgrass, which is super beneficial. It helps stabilize the shore and therefore protect the communities that live along the shore. It creates habitat for other species because a shellfish bed is a very physically dynamic rather than a flat mud flat. So it provides a lot of like nooks and crannies for other species to use, commercial fish species, and so on. And it just creates a cascade of positive changes that we think will happen if we just give oysters a little bit of a boost in terms of providing additional substrate for the oysters to exist, which means making these oyster habitats, which is what we're currently focused on, is community-based artificial oyster reefs that we can put in the bay to help oysters grow their populations.
Rita, you have one minute.
Okay. So there's many different ways of adding substrate to the bay. The key component is recycled oyster shell. These are a couple different approaches you could have. You can be very, very creative and very, very artistic in the way that you add oyster shells back into the bay to encourage native oyster population growth. This is one program on the East Coast that are essentially our mentors, the Billion Oyster Project. And they've put in, I believe, over 30 million oysters back into the Hudson Bay estuary. And they've done that all with, I believe, middle school and high school students. So that's what we would like to do here. We have a new program called Oyster Base Camps, which is essentially an artificial oyster habitat that we'd like to create. And the reason why we think now is a great time is it's because it's a very small type of modular oyster habitat that can be created, deployed, maintained, and monitored by 1 or 2 people. So you can do it while you're socially distancing. And it's a way that people can stay involved in environmental restoration work when there's so many things that they can't be involved in right now, in person.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I wish we could proceed more and more with this. This is such an interesting subject. And we really appreciate both you and Linda coming and presenting this. But we do need to move on. I'm sorry.
That's a
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now for Liz Taylor, who is President, CEO of DOER Marine, a deep ocean exploration and research company. DOER designs and builds subsea systems for applications ranging from ocean exploration to infrastructure inspection. Liz has became president in 1994. She has been involved in projects related to coastal restoration, water management, levees, and public access to the water. Welcome, Liz, to the workshop.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to join everyone here. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this subject. It's one that's really near and dear to me personally. I've had kind of a growing up between both coasts, the Boston area, the Florida area, and along the California coast as well over the years. So I've really been a witness to change. I think as everyone here has been a witness to change, to see the incredible loss of biodiversity that we faced, this incessant paving over of natural systems at increasing velocity, which is detrimental not only to local water quality, but also to our own health. So I really applaud the efforts going on with the landscape architect firms in trying to turn that back a bit, doing things like, cracking that pavement, looking at alternatives to these solid impermeable surfaces, which lead to really decrease in water quality, which again is a decrease in habitat. And we see issues happening with the microplastics and the plastic stream of waste coming into the bay. And it's happening on a global level. So everything that we do here locally to kind of lead by example is really beneficial. DOER builds a lot of equipment that can go to full ocean depth. We helped Jim Cameron build his full ocean depth submersible. We work with a lot of universities to go out and look at regions in the deep sea. But we also realize that these things that end up in the deep sea start on land. So we've had the experience of working to test a new deep water ROV for the University of Hawaii and deploying it in 4,000 meters of water and getting to the bottom and turning on the lights. And the very first thing we see is a Dasani water bottle. So, and it just came from the land, right? So these are the sorts of things that just really chap your hide on a daily basis to think about what can be done to turn this back, to really actively work to engage the community, to understand that every single one of us has the capacity to do something. And when a lot of us are doing something, the ability to change and have these systems recover can accelerate, and we do have the capacity to restore. DOER is, of course, we're a for-benefit corporation, so we do work closely with a number of nonprofits, including Wild Oyster Project. We have MOU with the Aquarium of the Bay over in San Francisco, trying to help them work on their new project over there to expand their educational programs and rebuild the aquarium. Working again with some of the different cities and port authorities along the bay here to see how they can, again, moving forward, being able to include the environment in their design. We really do take for granted, or we don't really think about all the free services that the natural systems afford to us. I've seen that as myself, growing up in Florida. My dad is an invertebrate zoologist, my mom is a marine biologist, and to watch this unilateral destruction of things like mangrove forests, which provides so many natural services. And here on the West Coast, the same with the eelgrass beds being mentioned. So much natural service in terms of filtering the water, providing habitat for important species. And it's really a travesty to see what's happened to it over the years and how much destruction. But on the upside, working through Mission Blue, the San Francisco Bay was recognized as a Mission Blue Hope Spot just last year. And what that does is it kind of puts a spotlight on the San Francisco Bay area as an area that through community engagement and effort, damage can be repaired and restored. And it gives you kind of a way to track that progress over time. So you go to the Mission Blue website, you can see all the different hope spots around the world and San Francisco Bay, brand new one. But I really encourage everyone to get involved in that process and to, you know, become a bit more involved in the citizen science aspects, working with Wild Oyster Project. Another group we work with is a Natural Discourse, which is an artist collective working to bring the arts back in and reconnect them with science in ways that can really be compelling and reach people that might otherwise not be reached, to have them understand the connectivity and the importance to human health. Without a robust, thriving, biodiverse ecosystem, our own health suffers. We're seeing that right now with the pandemic. You know, that the entire thing is caused by a rift and disruption of natural systems and a mashup of species that in nature would have never come together. But for our, you know, our intervention into it and really, you know, this consumer-driven, consuming of nature rather than collaborating with nature. So I really look forward to some of the results of this workshop and to seeing some of these ideas being more broadly implemented, not just by big landscape firms and big cities, but in every single backyard. Every lawn can be reduced. Everyone can have a rain garden. There's things everyone can do upstream to help the bay downstream and the ocean beyond. And I know we're on a time crunch today, so I just wanted to kind of keep it short and concise. And I really encourage everyone to come over and see us. We have a new Deep Ocean Explorer store here. We're trying to get kids involved in you know, everything from birding to scuba diving, everything in between. And I really look forward to seeing the results of this workshop and working with everyone along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. I had a chance to go to your website and it was quite amazing. It was impressive what you're doing with submersibles and all sorts of interesting vehicles. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And now we're going to hear from Caitlin Sweeney. She's director of the SF Estuary Partnership, a collaborative working to protect, restore, and enhance water quality and fish and wildlife habitat in and around the San Francisco Bay Delta Estuary. Caitlin is experienced at developing policies and programs in response to emerging coastal issues such as climate change, watershed management, wetland restoration, public access, ecosystem-based management, and information management. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen for my presentation. So again, yes, my name is Caitlin. I'm the director of the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. Just a brief background on the partnership before I get started. We were established in 1988 as part of the National Estuary Program under the Clean Water Act as a U.S. Environmental Protection Agency place-based program to protect and restore estuaries, excuse me, of national significance, which of course San Francisco is one. So we are one of 28 national estuary programs across the country. And this map shows the planning area of the Estuary Partnership. You can see that we cover actually the entire bay and the delta together, making up the estuary, as well as all of the watersheds that drain to the estuary. Kevin covered some of this already, some of the good stats for our estuary: 1,600 square miles, drains 40% of the state, provides drinking water for 23 million people. Of course, rich with fish and wildlife habitat, and as we all know, a very highly urbanized region. So the partnership is collaborative and we're non-regulatory, and essentially we leverage federal, state, and local resources to support projects and programs to protect and restore the entire estuary system. And we do so working with a large suite of diverse partners. We know that the Bay is a magical place, and we know that our population understands that the Bay is really a vital part of our quality of life. And even people who don't frequently come into contact with the bay understand this. It's our #1 economic engine. It's vital to tourism, to commerce, to public recreation. And of course, it sustains thousands of species of fish and birds and wildlife that are really critical to keeping our entire ecosystem in balance. Specifically, our tidal marshes. Again, I'm going to repeat some of what Kevin already covered, so you'll see some similar slides and similar stats, but it's worth repeating, always worth emphasizing. But tidal marshes, as we like to say, are magical. And they provide a wide array of ecosystem services, obviously providing habitat for fish and wildlife. Thousands of species depend on the unique characteristics of tidal marshes for habitats. They filter out pollution. As water flows through the marsh, it actually captures pollutants so that the water flows out the other side. It's cleaner. Tidal marshes act as a natural barrier against flooding, trapping wave energy, absorbing storm surge, really critical in our climate adaptation strategies. And of course, these habitats that are on the doorstep of millions of people provide places to be in and appreciate nature and to engage in scientific study and education and all sorts of recreational opportunities. So this is another version of the slide that Kevin showed. This shows 1800, around 1800s in the bay, where we had nearly 200,000 acres of tidal marsh at that time. But between 1800 and 2000, we lost about 80% of our tidal marshes, lost about 150,000 acres to diking and filling for a variety of purposes, development, agriculture, salt production. And then in 1999, a large group of scientists and practitioners and government officials got together to figure out how to make the bay healthier. And they calculated that we needed to reach a goal of 100,000 acres of tidal marsh to achieve a healthy bay shore. So about half of what we used to have, 100,000 acres. So that science mandate really sparked rapid restoration of tidal marsh by 2009. And the acquisition of many more areas that we can restore into the future. So we're now about approximately halfway to our goal of 100,000 acres. We have about 52,000 acres of tidal marsh and restored tidal marsh in our system currently. So all this restoration would have gone on to achieve the goal that we were looking for, no doubt, except for climate change and sea level rise, right? So tidal marshes have to build up rapidly to stay above water as the sea level rises. And we know that sea level is going to increase very quickly starting in a few decades as global ice reserves melt. This figure actually that I'm showing is from an August report this summer, August 2020, of the Legislative Analyst's Office. And as shown, the magnitude of sea level rise is projected to be about half of 1 foot in 2030 and as much as 7 feet by 2100. And these estimates actually don't incorporate periodic increase in sea levels caused by storm surges or exceptionally high tides, or king tides as we call them, or El Nino events. So those kinds of events can produce actually notably higher water levels than sea level rise alone. Also, the data shown in this figure don't include possible extreme scenarios that incorporate the effects of potential ice loss from the West Antarctic ice sheet. So if there's considerable loss in polar ice sheets, scientists estimate the California coast could experience actually over 10 feet of sea level rise by 2100. So rising seas and more flooding have obvious devastating impacts to our communities, including drowning our historical and our restored tidal marshes, impacting those critical services that tidal marshes provide that I talked about earlier, including their ability to protect communities from rising water levels and storm surge. So what can we do? A key recommendation of scientists working in the Bay region is really that we need to accelerate the pace and the scale of wetland restoration. We've had huge successes with restoration over the past 20 years, and we really need to get the remaining wetlands projects implemented in the next 15 years or so that they can accumulate sediment and become vegetated with marsh plants before sea level rise really takes off. So the marshes will be much more resilient and adaptable if they are fully vegetated tidal marshes as waters rise rather than newly restored or lower elevation mudflats. So how do we do this? Obviously, we need a lot of money, right? We need funding. It all comes down to funding. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about one potential funding source, which is the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. So the authority is a regional agency created to essentially collect and disperse funds to fund projects that protect and restore and enhance the San Francisco Bay. The authority is staffed from the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, as well as the State Coastal Conservancy. Kevin mentioned Measure AA. So this measure passed in June 2016 in the 9-county Bay Area. It's a $12 a year parcel tax that will generate over 20 years, $500 million for restoration around the Bay. So about $25 million a year. So this gets us quite far. The estimation is that what we need to do all of the restoration that we would like to do will cost over $2 billion. So this certainly doesn't cover everything we need, but it is a really critical source of local funding that we can use to leverage other state and federal funds. So in terms of what the Restoration Authority can fund with these Measure A funds, they can fund habitat projects along the shoreline that enhance tidal wetlands, manage ponds, natural habitats along the shore. The authority can also fund flood management features and public access or recreational amenities if those features or amenities are associated with a habitat restoration project. For example, if you have a tidal marsh restoration project and you need to build up the levee on the landward side to protect the adjacent communities, the authority could fund that element as well. In terms of eligibility, eligible grantees include federal, state, and local agencies, tribal governments, nonprofits, and also owners and operators of parcels along the shoreline. And locations along the shoreline in the 9-county Bay Area are eligible. And interestingly, Measure A has a list of quite diverse prioritization criteria that the authority evaluates potential projects against. And these criteria, as you can read, are diverse enough that they can really allow the Restoration Authority to fund a diverse suite of kinds of projects. So very small, very large, planning, implementation, etc. You can see these prioritization criteria include things like the greatest long-term impact, greatest positive impact, taking into account the geographic distribution of funds, whether or not the project is able to leverage other state and federal dollars, whether or not projects benefit economically disadvantaged communities, benefit the entire region's economy, engage youth, or incorporate monitoring, maintenance, and stewardship. So to date, the Restoration Authority has funded 22 projects from 3 rounds of funding. And you can see from this map that the projects are dispersed all around the 9-county Bay Area. So the 2020 grant round, I'm laughing because the due date is today, so I apologize for that. But this gives you an idea. You'll see this again next year. So for this current round, proposals are due today. You'll see a next round be announced next fall, 2021. But this is just giving an idea of sort of the general timing of Measure A funds. So proposals are due in the fall, evaluated over the fall and winter, and award dates will be the next spring. But what the authority is also doing this year, which is new, is a pilot program for community grants. So this is actually a separate application pathway to support projects led by community-based organizations, specifically in economically disadvantaged communities. So this program, the pre-application, yes, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, you have 1 minute?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Pre-applications are actually accepted on a rolling basis, so there is no due date. And staff will work with applicants individually to develop a full proposal that can be recommended to the board for funding. So for this year, we only have $200,000 for the pilot project, but I anticipate that this will be a continuing and growing part of the Restoration Authority program over the years. So eligible project for the community grants actually include things like community visioning, includes training for leaders within economically disadvantaged communities to develop, apply for, and implement small projects in partnership with landowners. It can support community-based organizations in gaining knowledge of shoreline issues, in building relationships with government agencies and nonprofits engaged in enhancement and restoration so that they can have a real voice in the design and implementation of larger projects. And it can fund the implementation of small shoreline habitat projects with strong community benefits, such as community engagement, education, workforce development, leadership development, community celebrations, and the like. So it's a really exciting project. And I think, again, just to emphasize, I think this will continue to grow and expand over the years of the next, what do we have, 17 years left of the program of the Restoration Authority.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It's so interesting. It's reinforcement of what Kevin said and what you said really emphasizes. I live right on the water in Emeryville, and if it comes up 10 feet, I'm going to be underwater. So thank you so much. It was really great.
Thank you.
Well, we'll move forward. We have some questions in the chat. 2 questions by Armando Davila to everyone. Would it, does this estuary system have legal representation, and would it benefit from a nature's rights initiative? So if someone wanted to step up and answer that.
Okay, well, I'll jump in.
Okay.
This is Liz here. You know, we've also seen there in the chat that the BCDC is supposed to be the kind of the legal representation for the Bay, but it seems increasingly, particularly maybe in the last, I don't know, 7 to 10 years, that many of these development projects that are, you know, right on the water and really at, you know, kind of being built in harm's way are being just kind of pushed through. And it's very perplexing to, I mean, knowing what we now know, to see these kinds of projects actively being promoted and approved. It really doesn't make sense. You know, we all end up paying in the long run for these poorly implemented plans, and along with those comes a real loss of direct access for the public along the water. I don't understand why the water, when we see a new development project coming along, the water is almost always fenced off somehow, and there's not an effort to have it broadly accessible and to encourage people to, you know, get wet. So that's a great question, and I'd love to hear from others about how they think we could do a better job in getting some legal protection for the Bay.
Anyone else?
I would have said the same, essentially, that BCDC, I think, comes the closest as a state agency with authority over development in the Bay and along the shoreline of the Bay. It's been in place since 1965, a really strong legal entity, and does take its job very seriously in terms of protecting the natural resources of the Bay and providing public access for the public with shoreline development projects. And there are other state and federal agencies that, of course, also have some degree of authority over the Bay or over its resources. But I think it's fascinating. I was listening to the plenary session, and I'd love to learn more about sort of a broader approach, what those ideas might be for a broader approach to legal rights.
I'm not quite sure if anybody answered this question from Armando. Would it benefit from a nature's rights initiative? Caitlin?
That's what I was referring to. I don't know enough about such an initiative to speak to that, but I think it's a fascinating idea, and I'd love to learn more about the thoughts behind it.
Okay, that sounds great. From Karina Templis, she asked, how can we actively support Mission Blue's SF Bay Hope Spot? Does anyone know about that?
I tried to answer that in the, this is Liz again, I tried to answer that in the chat. And you can go to the Mission Blue website and get some more information there, but the main initiative, or the local champion for the Hope Spot, is Karina Nielsen over at the Romberg Tiburon campus of the Estuary and Oceans Science Center at San Francisco State University. So she's been kind of the science lead. And I think that, you know, the more groups, I know we have a lot of different small nonprofits and other groups around the Bay that are all kind of pulling for it. But if there are ways and means to kind of share information with her, Mission Blue is working with Esri, the big GIS firm down in Redlands, to create a story map for San Francisco Bay for the Hope Spot. So to the extent that we can get more collaboration there and provide Mission Blue with that information about what all different groups are doing, then perhaps be woven into the story map and, you know, be more broadly accessible to the public to find out what they can do to help in a big way and also on an individual basis.
Great. Carol Drake asked, have these plans been presented to the opposition of the Delta Tunnel project? Can someone answer that? Anybody?
I'll jump in again, why not?
Sure, thank you.
I'm not aware of very much being presented. Well, and there has been a lot of opposition to the Delta Tunnel project just because of basically this idea of shunting water around from one place to another, really without thinking about the natural services that water provides to systems like San Francisco Bay. The whole problem of conveying the water around but not allowing it to do its real job of maintaining the health of the bay is something we really do need to look at, and how we can all, you know, reduce the amount of water that's being used can help. And I see someone else has put a new thing in the chat about the Sierra Club supporting a big initiative against the Delta tunnels now. But I think it's really imperative that all of us, speak up to that fact of why are we just kind of letting this water be shoved around to serve development purposes when its highest, best use is in maintaining the health of the ecosystems that support us all.
Well, thank you very much. I can understand that. Let's see, Bill Pinkham, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Caitlin or anyone else, have you talked at all or thought about funding some way the preservation of the Bay Trail? This is pretty key, and of course it's close to the water. I can see us losing Alameda, the city. Parts of the Bay Trail are actually a little bit higher than that, but most of them are around that level or lower. Have you done anything about that? Talked about that at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Estuary Partnership is actually our host agency is the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is now consolidated with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and the Bay Trail program is housed within those agencies as well. So we work very closely with the Bay Trail staff. And you're absolutely right. There's a large shift right now among the Bay Trail staff and in thinking about prioritizing funding to not only close those critical remaining gaps that remain in the Bay Trail, but also to keep the existing trail from being inundated by sea level rise where that makes sense. So certainly thinking about sea level rise and continuing the Bay Trail into the future is a high priority for the Bay Trail program and their board.
Have you any ideas about what you could do in that event?
I think a lot of it will be the most opportunities come with new trail segments, right? So how and where you design new trail segments, whether you need to elevate it or farther back from the shoreline, how you can design those in a way that they are resilient to some level of sea level rise. The existing segments are certainly a harder one to
tackle. A lot
tackle.
of miles of existence.
That's right. So you might have to take them in chunks and think about redesigning chunks of them. I think there are opportunities to redesign the shore side of bay trails to increase the protection for the trail itself. For example, increasing the amount of tidal marsh where you have opportunities to increase tidal marsh on the shore side of the trail, or other more resilient sort of nature-based approaches to shoreline adaptation strategies that can help protect everything behind, including bay trail. In many cases, the bay trails are the first line of defense too from shoreline flooding for the communities behind them. So it's really a critical regional asset for us all.
And Bill and others, this is Kevin Conger. I would add that for your interest, there's a project that's happening right now in Southern Marin and Richardson Bay through the Boathen Marsh to look at realigning that pathway or elevating it or doing some adaptation to the pathway while trying to increase the health of Boathen Marsh. There's 3 options now. You can look, find it on the OneTam website, OneTam, and they're right now seeking community input on the 3 various options.
And that's great. I'm a biker and I ride down through that Richardson Bay and it floods a lot in the springtime. Yeah, I can see how you would want to elevate it. Thank you. So informative, everything that you're telling us about. Are there more questions? Any more questions from?
This is Jack. I finally got back on my phone. I think the internet went out in the neighborhood where I am. I'm out of town right now, so sorry about that. But I'm glad that everything seems to be going along well. But when I lost it, Kevin, you were speaking and talking about how the plans for the Alameda Deep Pave Park we're going to welcome sea level rise, and I think that sounds really nice. The question is, how many feet of sea level rise can you accommodate? I mean, there's big speculations about how much it's going to go up. I mean, it could be 80 feet, it could be 6 feet, or it could be 3 feet. What are you thinking about in terms of what you can accommodate?
Well, I'll qualify it by saying that we're at a vision phase now for the purposes of the grant application, and if that is successful, we'll have to do then a comprehensive master plan that includes a lot of community input and a lot more technical analysis, which will then give us a better answer to that question, Jack. But our initial thinking is that that with 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise, that park will become, say, maybe 50% wet to dry. Once we get to 6 feet of sea level rise, then almost the entire site becomes intertidal and subtidal at that point.
Wow.
Do you have an opinion about, I know that there's lots of speculation about how sea level rise, how much it's going to be. What's the latest thinking on that? California
has updated the estimates, which are showing possibility of up to 6 feet in 50 years. That's different than the Army Corps of Engineer, which is showing slightly less. That's the high end. So I think that the science varies all the time, but I think most people are thinking in the range of 1 to 3 feet within the next 50, 60 years.
Great.
I'd like to add on that as well, that with the increase in the groundwater pumping, we also have to look at the the kind of duality of the sea level rise times the ground subsidence issues that we're also facing.
These are, thank you, everyone. Jack, are you still there?
Yes.
I'm going to turn over the next part to you for the more detailed discussion on actions.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. Can you tell me how many people are on the call right now? Because we were kind of trying to decide whether to break into breakout groups or stay in one group. And the fact that I can't get on my Zoom right now might mean that the answer is going to be we're going to stay in one group, just because I don't know if I can figure out how to do breakout groups. So how many people are on the call right now?
21 participants. So I think
21.
we should...
Well, actually, that's a good size. I think we should just stay together then, partly because that's the only choice we have, but I think that's actually what we would have done anyway. I was thinking one thing we could do is have everyone go around and just sort of say how they are connected to this issue or why they came to this, and then maybe we could work on what I missed a lot of the presentations. I'm sure the speakers raised a lot of points. Clevia, maybe you can help us out here. Are you on the call, Clevia?
Yeah, I'm on the call.
Yeah, so if you've been taking notes, maybe you can give us a little report on what you got out of the talk so far in terms of action items, because that is our goal, is to come out of these workshops with as many action items that we can ask all the cities in the Bay Area, or at least the ones that adjoin the Bay in this case, which is quite a few, to what they should be doing to try to preserve the wetlands. But then I think I was watching Kevin's your sketch of how big the watershed is for the Bay Area. I mean, it's huge. So I mean, it really affects all of us, the things that we're doing. So I think that is our goal, is to come up with action items. But I thought maybe we could spend a few minutes just kind of go around and have everyone introduce themselves and say what they wanted, what they would like to, why they're here and what they wanted to get out of it, if they had a specific organization they're with, or any. I saw earlier that Eduardo was on the call. Are you still there on the call, Eduardo? Eduardo Martinez from City of Richmond, and obviously you've got a lot of bayfront land in Richmond, so maybe you can talk a little bit about what you thought, what your thinking is.
Yeah, I'm a city council member for the city of Richmond, and we have over 39 miles of shoreline. A lot of it is contaminated, and I'm really worried about sea level intrusion and how the toxins in the soil will be leached into the bay. And so I liked Kevin's answer to my question, and I'm curious as to how we might be able to employ that, what did he call it, the deep soil compaction as a remedy for preventing the sea level intrusion, and I'm also concerned about how what we do in one area of the bay will affect the other areas. So it's one ecological unit. So I think we need to have a regional plan as to how we approach our solutions. So that's what I've been looking at. Am I frozen?
So, yeah, no. So I think the panel can respond, or where we can move on. I mean, there's a lot you said a lot there. I think that's exactly what we wanted to talk about, these kind of things, like what cities can do. So if people have ideas on that, or other people want to chime in, I don't know. It's hard for me to facilitate when I'm on the phone, so I'm not quite sure how to proceed. But would people like to go around and just say their names and what they're here for, or what they had in mind?
I think that's great. And I was going to ask if Kevin might respond to Eduardo.
Yeah, sure. The groundwater issue has come up a couple times here, and it's definitely an issue. As the water in the bay goes up, so too will the groundwater on the land side into a certain distance, depending on soil permeability and other concerns. And so rising groundwater, even if we build levees or whatever to protect land from overtopping of the bay, rising groundwater is eventually going to catch up to it. And there are some technical solutions that can be done to cut off groundwater so that the bay does not have such an influence on the inland groundwater. However, I think that there's other implications to that also need to be understood. So I mean, the short answer is this is a big problem, and a really complicated problem, and really a difficult problem to handle. And I think the big takeaway for me is that things are going to change around the bay. There is no easy, no change solution to prevent sea level rise and groundwater from coming up, and to preserve and build new wetlands. I mean, we're in for a century of big change in the Bay Area and around the world. And we should start to have more of these conversations now with more people to start to understand what the priorities are and how we're going to deal with it and fund these things in an equitable way.
Let's do this kind of popcorn style. Would someone else like to speak up and talk about why they're here, where they live, what's their concern?
I'll start, Nana.
Oh.
I'm Bill Smith. I live in Alameda. I
Uh-huh.
live right on the edge of the bay, so I look right on it. And I'm also co-chair of the Sierra Club's statewide environmental and social justice task force. And Kevin, I was glad to hear you mention equitable funding. A lot of these projects, the people that are going to have the most trouble adapting, getting out are the lower income people. And in a place like Alameda, someone said we're going to have to be abandoned in 100 years. Well, we're planning on building 10,000 new homes here in the next 20 years. So I think we need to start to think about stop building and building in places where we won't have to rebuild, and eventually managing retreat from these areas. That's very difficult. It won't help you generate, if you talk about it, it won't help you generate funding either for your projects from the local municipalities either. But that's something that people like myself will be bringing up, that we're in a place to do that.
Great, thank you, Bill. Thanks, and thanks to the Sierra.
Popcorn.
Yes.
How about Daniel Correa?
Daniel?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So my name is Daniel Correa. I actually work with the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District. I'm one of the EcoStewards Conservation Technicians. I actually have other colleagues with me in this session. I'm sure they'll talk later about themselves. So basically, I do a lot of the restoration with that district, with the Resource Conservation District, and I do a lot of maintenance as well for partner projects or Department of Work and Department of Water Resource projects as well. So I'm here basically to listen and see if I can get any good information on restoration, ways to restore different areas that have been disturbed. We have a lot of projects that have a lot of invasive species, that have have a lot of erosion problems. So I'm here to just like listen to you, the experts on how we can restore, areas in the Delta, especially on, restoring their habitat for biodiversity and restore some of the native plants that have been, cut away from due to invasive agricultural impacts. And also network and see if there's any other funding that we can get in order to progress these projects and ensure that Delta and other Bay areas are maintained and are being restored to what they used to be before. So any kind of like new, any new restoration ideas, any new funding is, I'm here to listen to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. Is there anyone in particular you'd like to hear from?
I mean, anybody has any, any ideas on restoring and maintaining, wetland areas? So anybody can just say anything, if you have any crazy idea that, I'm here to listen to.
Great.
Jump in. This isn't really an answer, but kind of wondering some things. I mean, the nature's rights idea, there's like, I think Ecuador put in their constitution that their natural landscapes and ecosystems have legal rights. And I know some other places are proposing that strategy so that if like the Delta thing kind of comes up, someone can litigate on behalf of the ecosystem in order to ensure that its essential functions are maintained and it's not endangered. And so the original like spirit behind this Bay Area Climate Emergency Declaration campaign was a regional mobilization. And when I imagine that, even though we don't think of like nature's rights and ecosystem services, and when we think of climate change, because we've been somewhat siloed, intellectually colonized, my vision is like, how do we, I guess when I think about climate change, I imagine solving it means we prioritize, our like not just the wetlands, but like our entire ecosystemic diversity and to, center it in some kind of transgovernmental format, which I feel like this estuary project and y'all's work kind of has more kind of institutional grounding on how these funding streams and like, the governmental side of it, like how these things form up and function. And it seems like we need to kind of like redefine, it seems like we need to do like another level of funding, recognition, like policy work to just like make sure that all of our ecosystems are prioritized and adapting, and then all of our regional planning kind of fits into this different paradigm where we're actually really prioritizing the adaptation of our local section of the earth so that, we are resilient as a region. And I'm kind of wondering, I feel like there's like a institutional level, there's like a next wave to this kind of thinking that's being articulated here to kind of constrain and guide the development, as the fellow from Alameda was talking about, but to also like, secure the funding, change the parameters. I'm kind of repeating myself, and then like coordinate and like getting the focus coordination across these different governmental agencies. Because I'm also just really concerned about the politics. Institutions are fragile to political influence. And so I'm just like wondering, how do we like really do that paradigm shift institutionally while also getting some political resilience in the face of like the next predatory effort.
Thank you, Armando. That's some pretty deep thinking there on how we work more holistically instead of individually. We really do need a transformative plan. Other people? Anybody else would like to speak out?
Yeah, I would. I'm Bill Pinkham from Richmond. And as a bicycle advocate, you can understand why I'm concerned about the Bay Trail, among other things. But I really appreciated Eduardo's comments and made me think of one area where we are working on, where we could always use help, also with the Sunflower Alliance, hence the, it's Phillips 66's plan to build a wharf, extend their wharf into the bay to bring in more crude. They're switching to biodiesel, but they still need, that's got its serious problems too, of course, but they are going to bring in more oil. And this dock is right next to an area called Selby Slag. There was a company, Selby, that refined gold and so on in the gold rush days and other metals. And the residue were things like arsenic, antimony, all kinds of bad stuff. They decided to solve the problem of this huge area of crap by coating it with a thin layer of asphalt. We really want to prevent Phillips from digging. They said somehow we can prevent disturbing it, and B, the huge props from oil tankers and other ships are bound to stir it up. It's already had a serious impact on life in the bay, fish, et cetera, et cetera. I think Baykeeper is also part of this. Sunflower Alliance is working on it, and if you want to get connected, by all means, go to sunflower.org and we'll hook up with you. But like I say, there's some other groups working on it too. I feel it's really important. It's something specific we can do.
Thank you, Bill, very much. Others that might have some ideas on what we're going to do here?
Yeah.
Some action items?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm in my car actually waiting to get on a ferry here in the Delta to go to Bradford Island. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
ironically, and I
Yeah.
work with Contra Costa Resource Conservation District with Daniel as a watershed program manager. And I actually have a meeting with, ironically, with the Department of Toxic Substances about the Selby slag today at 4 p.m. So I guess I'm looped into all of this in a way. We've created a counter proposal to the EIR that was supposed to be actually submitted and accepted on Friday. And we are, as a group, meeting today to propose that. So our part as the Resource Conservation District is to incorporate a living, not levee so much as slope coming out from that Selby slag. So we're working with several agencies, including Sunflower Alliance today. So I thought I would kind of add that into the mix, but we are also working on a living levee grant today to put into the Restoration Authority for the Rodeo area with Rodeo Sanitary District. So just a lot going on. So that is why I'm here.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's kind of a loop in on all of it. So
I thought maybe you would drive onto the ferry and keep talking while we were.
To actually, I think I'll be done and then I'm going to drive onto the ferry.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone would like to be looped in on kind of our situation with our levy at the slag, please reach out to us at the Resource Conservation District.
Bill Smith just raised his hand. Bill?
Oh,
hey, Bill.
I
I have to drive onto this ferry. so I don't know if I'm going to keep my internet connection here or if my phone will go dead. So
what's the name of the district again?
It's Contra Costa Resource Conservation District.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and if I get cut off, you can contact me through Daniel.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to shut everything down and drive.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Others? Please. I'd love to hear from as many people as possible. It's great. I'm really loving the conversation.
I can, well, I just have something to add. My name is Clavian. I am the note taker for this session. So if you miss out on anything, feel free to check out my notes after. Of course, there's a recording of the website. I am currently working with the 350 Bay Area Mobilizing team, which is focused on like getting youth more involved with the climate change movement. I just wanted to add on with Bill and I think Heidi, was it, that we are actually looking to do like some kind of youth movement or something like that regarding Selby slag. So would love to get in contact with anyone who's involved with that so we can try to do a little project with that. And I guess for me personally, I'm in Contra Costa right now, but I grew up in Fremont. So I used to go to like the Coyote Hills area and Don Edwards area a lot. So this was definitely a really great learning experience, and these things just really hit close to home. And I just think it's really important for more people to be aware of the importance of, you know, our marshes and also like what oysters can do and things like that. So I'm definitely open to helping just, you know, spread awareness and just learning more about this movement.
Thank you, Clavia. Nice. Others? I see Carol Sparks, Ginny, Kelly's iPad, Isabella Wink holding up 2 trees, I think. Others? Jack?
Well, actually, maybe because I missed so much, Cleveland, are you prepared to give a little report back at the plenary? We have like 10 minutes. We're supposed to be going back to the plenary, and each group gives a report back. Can you do that based on your notes? Would that be okay?
Yeah, I can do that. And then if anyone else has any action items they want me to include, I guess we could also talk about that, and I can include that in my notes.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. So if everybody can stay around for the plenary and hear that, I always look forward to hearing what the other groups had talked about. But it's also possible you can listen to Clevian's report, and then you can say, Clevian, if anybody has anything to add, then feel free to jump in with any points that you specifically wanted to emphasize that maybe she touched on or didn't touch on, either way. maybe the speakers could give a summary based on right now of how they feel about what came out of this in terms of their projects. Unless some other of the participants want to speak, we do want everybody to have a chance to speak. So that's, please feel prioritized.
I was wondering if maybe our speakers would like to add more, because like Linda, she was kind of cut off because of, or she had some limited time because of technical issue. Or even Kevin or Liz, if they want to add more that they couldn't get in.
Well,
Do you want to add anything?
I'd just like to reiterate the importance of maintaining this direct working access to the bay for people. This whole pattern of seeing everything just kind of fenced off from the bay is really, I think, just kind of a bad sign. I like the thing with the D-paved park showing kind of the bike path and so forth. But again, there's kind of a lot of fencing that's going on there. And I'd like to see, as part of these projects and coming kind of adaptive uses of the shoreline, that we don't forget the fact that we need for people to engage with the water. There needs to be provisions, not just for maritime companies to have working access to the water, but also for people to get out on the bay, be it with sailing or paddling, kayaking, whatever it is, and to really connect directly. So it's I think it's really critically important for people to have those opportunities, and for architects and people in landscaping in particular to find ways to actively encourage people to engage with the environment, so we solve this whole problem of this disconnect with our natural systems. So I really applaud efforts to do that, and we can do that in every city with any kind of a watershed. It can be a creek or a pond or whatever it is. It all connects to the bay and to the ocean beyond.
I think that's really excellent. I've noticed so much during the pandemic, so many more people, families out there in nature, kids wading in the water or being on the beaches and investigating and watching the birds and being much more interested in nature. And I really agree with you so much, rather than fencing off nature. I mean, I know that people need to be protected from, from invading into the wildlife and drowning or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, but I do think there's so many ways that we can encourage people to be more in touch with nature. I feel it every time I go out on a birding day, that I feel so much more connected with the wildlife out there.
I love seeing more people are establishing, like birders, right? They have a life list, right? And to see that people are starting to do that, they're using on their phone, using iNaturalist a lot more to kind of, figure out what is that flower, what is this, and to really ignite that and preserve that natural curiosity that every kid has, but that as adults it's so often quashed as we get older. We're told don't touch that. It's wet, it's icky, it's damp, and we just really need for people to have the opportunities to remain curious and to enhance their natural scientific curiosity, and to pick up a pair of binoculars or a simple hand lens when they walk out the door, and then to have a place to report that back and to share those findings with others. But if we're consistently making it less and less accessible for people to connect with water, then it's just a nightmare. It just becomes worse and worse, and we continue to see this deterioration and this disconnect.
I know what I tell my grandchildren: get dirty, get in there, put your hands in the mud. Let's get dirty, and then I send them home to their families. Parents. Yeah, and I can see, Kevin, that's what you're doing. Yes, with your work.
Getting dirty. Karina, did you want to say something, Karina?
Yes, another issue is access. Some of the low-income community, they don't have access to the shoreline, such as like Richmond. And I know a couple of programs out there, like Linda's previous Watershed program, Urban Till. They're trying to figure out a way to get the children to gain access. They can't cross the freeway or the road.
Right.
You know, I have an observation about this whole panel, which is based on the discussion, the presentations, and then the discussion, including the discussion in the chat, which is how quickly the conversation got bigger from talking about nature and ecological systems to public access of nature and issues of social equity. We talked about issues of mobility and transportation. We talked about groundwater. We talked about development, and there was some comments in the chat about affordable housing, which is also touches on equity. And so it's just to say that this this issue is broad and conciliant, word I like to use, where it's overlapping many different things, and it just I think it just points to the breadth and the importance of the issue of the edge of the bay and what that means to so many people for so many different reasons.
I mean, Kevin, do you feel there's a strong shift? Can you feel it?
Yes, of course. What I mean, the Bay Area, if you just go back, 100 years, we were a largely industrial water's edge. And, that's changed so much with the increasing population in the Bay Area, the deindustrialization of much of the edge of the Bay has put a lot of interest and demand on the Bay edge for other things, predominantly public access and natural restoration. That's all very positive. That's all a very, very positive thing, and might, without sea level rise, we might have a very optimistic view of the future were it not for sea level rise. But with sea level rise now on top of this, we, as I said before, we have really big questions. I mean, is there a way that we can retreat and create a healthy bay edge? And what does that retreat mean? Is that a local migration where we're going to move people into more dense and sustainable housing within the Bay Area? Is it a larger geographic migration where we're actually going to move away from the Bay Area and create new, more sustainable urban centers with transit and other things and affordable housing in other places in California? Or what? And this isn't just the Bay Area, this is the entire world. We're really facing in the next 100 years a migration that locally and globally that probably we've never seen before. And we're all going to be moving around and having to figure out a way to build new sustainable communities.
Well, that's a really profound point to end on. I think that is absolutely true, that mass migration due to climate change and sea level rise is definitely going to be a big part of our future. So I think that's really important. I don't think we're going to answer that today, but I hope everybody is going to gear up for that challenge and be part of that solution, whatever it is. Thank you so much, Nan. I'll have to say, when I lost my internet connection, I said, well, Nan can handle it.
I got a little panicky. I got a little panicky for a minute, but then I thought, I can do this.
Yeah, you did. So thank you, Nan. And thanks everybody for being on. And I hope I can see you back at the plenary. Thanks, Cleveland, for hanging in with us and giving the report, which I'm looking forward to hearing for sure in a few minutes. So, okay, anything else, or can we just go out back now?
We can go. Thank you so much, everyone. I've learned so much today, and I feel so much more positive about what we're trying to do with our wetlands and our watershed. So thank you. It's been an amazing morning for me.
Okay. See you soon, everybody. Bye.